Universalist Church in Eugene. My name is Molly Mae Culligan, and I am this morning's worship associate. If today is your first time with us, we'd love to get to know you. Right after service, you're invited to our welcoming room, which is located in the south entrance, so it's right over there. And if you're online, the link is being dropped in the chat right now for the visitor form. As you enter this sanctuary, and at any point during the service, you may write your joys and sorrows in our book, light a candle, or place a stone in the water, and that's right over there in the corner. Those joining from home can write prayers of joy and sorrow into the Zoom chat, which will be open until the start of the sermon. And during the week, anyone can go to the pastoral care portal on our website and let the ministers know how you may need some support. We gather in worship to find meaning and to live more deeply. Worship creates connections within, among, and beyond us, calling us to our better selves, calling us to live with wisdom and compassion. Whoever you are, whomever you love, whatever your image of the holy, we are glad you're here. So we're going to light the chalice, the symbol of our Unitarian Universalist faith, with words from David Breeden. We join together, bringing both our shadow and our light. We join together, opening our minds and our hearts. We join together, embracing, celebrating, sharing the beauty of each, the beauty of self, the beauty of the earth, the beauty of all. And now let's say together the words of our mission, which affirm our shared purpose. Empowered by love, we transform ourselves and serve our world.
Good Sunday morning, everyone. Happy Beltane and a festive Eid to everyone who observed Ramadan this year. I am the Reverend Jen Youngsun Rue, and I use the pronouns she and her. I am so happy to see all of you today, and especially these fine folks back here. Today's the first day that the choir has been in the sanctuary for a long, long time. And so it is a big day of celebration indeed. So some of you know the name Rachel Carson. She was a marine biologist and a writer who started the environmental movement with her book Silent Spring, which was published in 1960 and has been reprinted about 40 times. She once said, "Those who dwell among the beauties and mysteries of the earth are never alone and never weary of life." That feels so true to me, that those who contemplate the beauty of this small blue dot find reserves of strength that will endure for as long as life shall last. There is an innate beauty in the soaring eagle, the migration of birds, the ebb and flow of tides, the folded bud ready to burst open in the spring. There is something infinitely healing in the repeated cycles and patterns of nature, the reassurance that spring always comes after winter and dawn always follows the night. So come, let us contemplate beauty, lest our souls grow weary. Come, let us worship together. Sitting on a stony outcrop on top of a pine-covered mountain, the disciple once asked the teacher, could there be anything more wonderful than beauty? The teacher sat in silence for a long time, as teachers do, and then finally said, "Yes, there is something more wonderful. Your own present awareness of beauty." Maybe you have experienced that feeling of sitting on a stony outcrop at the top of a pine-covered mountain, soaking in the beauty of the place and that moment and that feeling of enoughness. Like there's everything right with the world and you don't need one more thing. You know that feeling? Where do you feel it? When do you feel it? Did someone say ocean? Rivers. Here. Garden. Springtime. When beauty is all around us, when you feel the sunshine. Faces of babies, perhaps. A particular landscape, or that one piece of music, that chord, or the progression of chords, that magnificent painting, a line of poetry, maybe an act of courage that you've witnessed, or a sublime act of kindness. What could be better than this? To spend one's life taking in all the beauty that it has to offer. And the teacher says, no, there's something even better than that. Something more wonderful than beauty, and that is our own present awareness of beauty. You know, I'm not exactly sure what that means, but I think maybe with all of us together, we might be able to get a little bit closer to an understanding. So if we start from the classical Western perspective, there's truth, goodness, beauty, right? These are the three things that humans apparently desire the most. These values, truth, goodness, beauty, were described by the ancients as transcendent values. And back then, beauty didn't have anything to do with fashion or culture or style. Beauty was our connection to the divine. Plato wrote that the journey to wisdom starts when we observe that the beauties of the earth are there for us to enjoy, but then mount upwards, we must leave them far behind. The finger pointing to the moon, but not the moon itself. Beauty then is not the end, but a way to something more. And so as time progressed, and as humans apparently progressed, we lost some of that spiritual dimension of beauty. And then beauty became more prescriptive and closely tied to religious piety, which then made everything outside those beauty boundaries not only ugly, but sinful and dangerous. We've been conditioned to think of beauty and ugliness as opposites, to see the absence of the beautiful attributes as ugly. But perhaps beauty and ugliness are the same. Both conditioned responses to what comes through all of our senses, but also pointing to something beyond and beckoning us to something more. Throughout human history, humans have tried to corral and destroy things that make us feel anxious and fearful, things that are shocking and displeasing. We call those things ugly. Vanessa Rochelle Lewis has just started a new movement called Reclaim Ugly. She talks about the history of uglification, how those in power have used standards of beauty to isolate, diminish, exclude, and exterminate those who couldn't or wouldn't conform. Uglification has been used, she says, for the purpose of nation building here in the US. And then she continues to say, in order for the pilgrims and the colonizers to come and create this country, they had to uglify the indigenous people that were here. They had to convince themselves that the indigenous were monstrous, less than human, savages, and then use that idea to justify murder, war, justify the stealing of land, and the stealing of children. And of course, the enslaved, too, were subject to uglification. Labeling others as ugly enabled slave traders to dehumanize the Africans that were captured and brought over to build this beautiful new country. This mindset polluted the air and the land of this country. In the late 1930s, Kenneth and Mamie Clark traveled the American South to study the psychological effects of racial discrimination and segregation. They asked children to choose between white dolls and black dolls. Maybe you heard of this study. The white dolls were overwhelmingly characterized as pretty, the black dolls as ugly, with the accompanying qualities of good and bad, clean and dirty. You know, when I first heard that poem that we heard earlier by the Pulitzer Prize-winning poet Jericho Brown, I thought about my father. When I was a child, I saw him as unreasonably obsessive about the way our house and our yard looked. Only later did I understand that being an Asian immigrant family in rural Ohio meant that he was constantly fighting against a stereotype that we were ugly, dirty, and bad. So keeping a beautiful yard for him was not just a matter of aesthetics. It was a matter of survival. In a world that has been made ugly by systematic oppression that reinforces sexism and racism and colorism, ableism, classism, ageism, militarism, and gender norms, what can we do to nurture beauty in such a world? You know, sometimes the simplest act will do. Some time ago, in the early 1990s, the country of Bosnia-Herzegovina was involved in a brutal war. It was, in fact, a genocide. And by the end of that atrocity, 80% of all the Muslims that lived there, and they made up almost half of the population, 80% of the Muslim population had been killed. So during that war, one day in the early 90s, a bomb exploded in the city of Sarajevo and killed 22 people who were standing in a line at the bakery getting bread. A man who lived close by named Verdun Smelovic lived near that bakery, and in fact, it was his bakery. He would have been in line that day under other circumstances. He was terribly distraught by the violence and the destruction that was being committed in his hometown. And so he did the only thing he knew how to do. There in the city square where bombs had exploded, among the piles of concrete and twisted wire and glass, he sat down with his cello and he played. And he played there every day for 22 days, one day for each person killed at that bakery, bringing beauty to the ugliness of war. We too can nurture beauty in places of ugliness. We can take our beautiful bodies out to protest and demonstrate. We can plant gorgeous flowers and vegetables on this piece of land that used to be covered in living things, but now is mostly paved over. But lots of gorgeous flowers are growing now. We can nurture beauty by sitting on the stony outcrop on top of a pine-covered mountain, experiencing peace and equanimity. We can nurture beauty by making music and poetry and art. By the way, we have a new exhibit that just went up yesterday, so please go take a look. And we can think and act and speak in beautiful ways that uplift and comfort one another. We can also nurture the beauty that's all around us, especially that which is considered ugly by some. If you were here last week during the loving kindness meditation, I asked you to picture a place that you thought was ugly. Do you remember that? What places came to mind when I asked you, when I invited you to think of an ugly place? Median strip. Garbage. Dumpsters. Oil refineries. War zones. Deforested areas. You know, there are more synonyms for ugliness than beauty. And I think the reason is because ugly stirs up a lot of energy, right? It stirs up a lot of negative emotions. And so when we find ourselves labeling something ugly, there is great opportunity for self-awareness. There's a lot to work with. And that self-awareness practice can be really hard. It can be very challenging because the reason that we call something ugly in the first place is to push it away because it elicits such strong negative feelings in us. And a lot of us just don't like to dwell in negative feelings. Often what we call ugly is what we fear or dread about ourselves. And maybe that's why they call it the ugly truth. It's also important to remember that if we're not attentive to our own present awareness of all the conditioned thoughts that we have about beauty, we could unintentionally uglify the world when we think that we're beautifying it. So it's one thing to see trash along the median strip or the side of the road and think, there is something wrong with this picture. And so you gather your small group and pick up the garbage along Chambers Street, as some of you did a couple of weeks ago. And that is beautifying the neighborhood. It's another thing, though, to look at ourselves in the mirror and think, there is something wrong with my face. There's something wrong with my hair. There's something wrong with my body. I need to beautify myself to meet some external standard. And that is uglifying ourselves, the way we were made, and uglifying natural aging. Or here's another example, the way we look toward our houseless neighbors living in unsightly conditions and think, we need to beautify this environment by getting rid of these unsightly people. And that's uglifying our siblings. In some US cities, there were so-called ugly laws that were on the books way up until the mid-1970s. These were laws that prohibited, quote, diseased, maimed, and disfigured people from going out into public. And they were mainly applied to those of lower status and means, of course. Thank goodness we have made progress. We have come a long way. And we have a long way still to go to truly affirming each and every person's worthiness, to perceive the truly beautiful in all aspects of life. So let me leave you with one final story that's told by Marcel Proust. He talks about this young man who was so restless and dissatisfied with his life, unhappy and constantly envious of others. He would sit at his parents' home, his parents' dining table, and be bored with his tasteless meal. He would look around the modest room and feel glum about the dreary plainness of the scene. He couldn't wait to escape these dull surroundings and create for himself an environment full of beautiful things if he only had the money to leave. But the best he could do was to spend the day at the museum. And there he would bask in timeless images of splendid architecture and beautiful people with gorgeous garments, houses decorated with works of art in every room, down to these tiny little salt spoons. And there he would stand in front of those masterpieces and stew in envy at the rich who could afford to adorn their homes like this. But one day, on the way to his favorite masterpieces, he wandered through a collection by another artist. And this one did not paint opulence. They painted the most mundane, ordinary scenes: fruit, bread, jars, slabs of meat. No bright colors, just the dull, ugly shades that were found in the young man's home. And the people, their faces, their clothing were ordinary, just like his family's, doing everyday things like reading books to their children and teaching their children needlework, washing dishes. Could this young man find satisfaction in this painting, in this scene, and therefore find satisfaction in his own life? Could he find beauty not only in the gold-plated coal tongs or the diamond-studded handles on the doors, but could he find it in the common crockery in his own home? When he walked into his own kitchen, could he say to himself, This is interesting. This is grand. This is beautiful. And so can we also seek out and nurture the beauty that is everywhere, already around us in our lives, in every interaction that we have with a stranger, in every word that we speak to each other? Let the answer be yes. May it be so. Blessed be. And please remain standing while we say the words of our chalice extinguishing together. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. And now go into this new day, this new week, and this brand new month, knowing that morning has come. You have been given a chance to start over, to start again, to do something new, to do something in a new way, and to see the world in a brand new way. And so go now in peace, go in beauty, go in love.